Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Kauke. Today, I'm genuinely delighted to have as my guest Leah Borges. She runs a company called Sales Done Right. She's a rare breed. She's one of those people who understands how to elevate sales out of the domain of transactional into the domain of actually doing it right, looking out for the customer's best interest, understanding that the customer wants to make a good decision well. They don't want to be handled. They don't want to be closed. They don't want to be convinced. What they want is an ally. And today we're going to be slaughtering some fatted calves and we're not going to be pulling any punches. And it's a delight to have someone else who rants more nicely than I do about the same topic, so you can get it from a different perspective. Leah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Marcus. You're so generous in your words.
I know. Well, it's just a joy because it's rare to find people who actually put the buyer at the heart of everything they do, who believe that the best way to sell is the best way to live, which is to be ethical. If other people have to pay the negative price for our positive payoff, that's not a good thing. And it doesn't create evergreen skills and evergreen relationships. So today, we're going to be digging into what makes a good salesperson. Do we recruit the right people? What's wrong with culture? What traditions and inherited beliefs have we bought into and not questioned? So, Leah, before we go any further, can we have a couple of minutes on your history and your background and how you came to the conclusion that doing it the traditional old way really didn't work for you and didn't work for your customers?
Yes. So I like to say I grew up in the hospitality business. So I started my sales career in the hotel business. I did that for about 10 years. Let me just back up. In the hotel business, you don't really have to have skills, quote unquote. So we're not really taught like to handle customers, right? We're not taught all these things like handle objections and all these things. And then I segued into consulting sales, which was a really good career move on my part because in consulting, by necessity, we had to go really deep with our customers. So I was doing safety consulting, right? So when we don't do things right in safety consulting, we sell the wrong thing, things explode, people die. We were working in high risk industries like oil and gas, mining, utilities, so we've seen all kinds of really bad accidents when things aren't done the proper way.
Absolutely.
I learned that unless you know with certainty what the customer is struggling with, what their business looks like, what they need to keep their employees safe, that, if we sold the wrong thing, then there were very, very negative repercussions from that.
What I find really interesting about that is it confirms thesis that I have, which is that all buyers filter for risk first. Then they filter for opportunity cost. And way down the list is value. If you speak to Charlie Green, who created the trust equation and wrote Trust-Based Selling and the best book on sales ever written, Trust-Based Selling, he says that credibility is the thing everyone majors on, and it's far and away the least important thing. It's about 5%. Intimacy is the most important thing, and that's about 70%. The problem is that what you just described is people who actually have market intimacy. They understand the context in which the company is operating. They have company or customer intimacy, so they understand the environment in which they're operating day to day. You earned buyer intimacy, human to human connection. And that is priceless. I was on a call to a client earlier on today, and he just received a text through from the C-suite buyer who'd asked him a couple of weeks ago for a bit of advice, said that he wasn't really sure about something and he thought he'd come to my client for this. And he just put an order through without going through procurement, without any process and without any discounting, said, it's because I trust you. I certainly would prefer to have a pipeline full of that instead of having to scrabble around cold. So let's deal with the first thing. Why on earth do we ever go cold? God, someone else thinks the same.
That's $1 million question, I think. I think a lot of businesses, you see it as you like the first wave, you're really going to, as you said, like fill the pipeline. Like we were talking about earlier, for me, doing cold outreach is right up there with using hot sauce as eye drops for me because of the way we've been taught to do it, like calling the C-suite on their cell phone, these types of things. I think this is how a lot of us have been taught to fill our pipeline, quite frankly, through cold outreach.
It just strikes me as a bit odd that hundreds of billions of dollars a year are spent trying to keep us out. And people just don't seem to ask the most obvious question, which
Mm.
is, how do I get invited in through the front door as a welcome guest? If you look at the 30 or 40 ways I currently teach to sell hot, I had a client who turned up in New York a month before the pandemic. Over that period, he then got closer to his family, had the best relationship he's ever had with his girlfriends. Well, his girlfriend at the time, still the same girlfriend, incidentally. He achieved massive success, then got promoted. He's then emulated all of that, and all of that with in a new market, new company, new product, no network.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, 18 months, moved from Australia to London. 18 months later, exactly the same circumstances. He's the number one salesperson in Clary worldwide by selling hot and by being a decent human being. The mathematics of it, talk me through the syntax of what happens when you put a bad lead through a pipeline.
Oh, I mean, I worked for a company that did this. It was a massive shit show, if I may use that word.
You absolutely can. We're not Americans.
Okay. It was horrible, Marcus. It was horrible. I mean, first off, when you don't have, you lose control. Like if you have so many salespeople doing this, you will eventually lose control over, number one, how many leads you're actually bringing in. But then you have this other problem where you're creating a lot of duplication. You're, burning through your prospects. And then your CRM gets overrun with all this bad data, bad leads, and it just never seems to correct itself. Number one, and then number two, you're skewing the outcome. When you are bringing in bad leads, your BDR SDR team is thinking they're doing a great job. If all the leads are bad, then what is the outcome that we're looking for? I think I'm thinking back to your earlier question of why we do this. We've been taught to do it without question, but also there's also an element of instant gratification.
Mm.
We want it now, and we don't want to spend the time to develop it otherwise. If that makes sense.
It does. And I hadn't really thought about the instant gratification. So I'm delighted that you've added that nuance. Something baffles me because we want to spend our time in front of buying customers, but we seem to spend our life putting non-ICP prospects into the top of the funnel and then playing the game, the factory churning game of trying to filter through them. The data on this is quite clear. On average, it takes 6 to 11 follow-up calls if you get a warm inbound that doesn't go through to the seller straight away. That's 6 to 11 touches per duff lead. Now, if I bring in 1,000 leads and 15% of them close, that leaves 850 that need to be followed up 6 to 11 times. On average, they then have to speak to 14 people to get invited in once. Then, on average, they blow 7 out of 8. Often, there's no hope of taking it any further because they've got the wrong prospect. So the prospect won't buy, and they see the risk, so they don't take it forward. Or they see the opportunity cost and they don't take it forward. So if you fill the top of the funnel with more leads and you play the numbers game, what you do is you create a ripple effect. So let's throw this out and see how many people bite. What if you didn't need any of the top of the funnel engine? So you needed none of the people, you needed none of the data, you needed none of the technology, you needed none of the governance or none of the management.
Mm-hmm.
Because instead you sell hot, not cold. Okay, if you're a mature business of 2-3 years with any number of customers and prospects, you never ever need to go cold again because you already have the network. You could get referred. If you use hot selling tactics in serial succession and in parallel, you can have a 35 times higher close rate, a 70 times higher close rate, which means no prospecting. That money, that resource can be redeployed. What if we didn't do any of the top of the funnel stuff?
I think you're describing what a lot of businesses would call pie in the sky situation. Even though, like from you describing it, I like my brain can understand that it makes sense, as you and
That
I know.
worthy of further discussion, do you think?
I think it's worth the discussion. I think, as you know, it's getting the corporate machinery to understand this concept and see it, because we've been so ingrained with you need to find as many prospects as you can, and the only way you can do that is through cold outreach. And you know what, I saw this conversation is really good because I saw a post on LinkedIn by a leader. I can't remember who it was, but there's a discussion in the sales community about how do we feel, like kind of what we're talking about. How do we feel about cold outreach at scale? Kind of that discussion. Someone said, this person said, we should probably have like our top prospects where we do personalization, but then everyone else, which is, I guess, 40, 50, 60%, however, whatever the percentage is of people, put them in the sequence and we should contact them at mass.
Why?
Because the reasoning that they gave was you'll never be able to build a pipeline that you need with just that small percentage of your ideal customer or your warm customers or what have you. This was the thinking. I mean, when I saw it, immediately it rubbed me the wrong way because I know when cold outreach goes bad most of the time. And I just didn't, I really didn't know how, well, I knew how to feel about it, but I didn't know how to say it to where people would like, freak out on me or whatever.
Well, if you can find it, I'll happily pile in because I'm definitely on your side on this. And it's actually really simple. If you look at your business, all of the listeners, have a look at your business. Do you have any processes that have a 50% or higher failure rate? So their intended outcome fails to materialize 1 in 2 or worse.
Mm-hmm.
That goes onto your amber list. Okay. Then you have any system or process or activity that has an 80% failure rate or only 1 in 5 success rate. That goes onto the red list. And then we have the blacklist, and that's anything that has a 1 in 20 success rate or a 19 out of 20 failure rate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the red list, there must be a 75% improvement within 1 month. There is one human being who is accountable to make sure it happens, and everyone else is responsible. You meet every 2 weeks, and you have a progress update in order to ensure that this is happening. Because it's unacceptable to have a system that fails 1 in 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
The red list, you've got 1 month, and you have to get it up to at least 75% efficacy, from 20 to 75. You've got 1 month, one person accountable, everyone else responsible, and in between you have interim reviews to make sure progress is being made. And the blacklist, you stop doing those things immediately. You've got to ask yourself the question, if you are a house builder and built 20 houses and you only got paid once, would you consider that to be a good business model?
I mean, obviously, of course not. I mean, I think the crux of it is how we're thinking about, like using the house builder example, how we're thinking about the things that we're doing in our buyer's business. We just don't think about it in those terms, in terms of it being like a mission critical type of process or situation.
I see your job and mine as essentially helping people to take the stone out of their shoe. Because most of this actually is people getting in their own way. If we look at the data that the Jolt effect generated with Gong's research, 60% of the pipelines ends up in closed cost, no decision.
Yeah.
And 52% of that, i.e. 31% of all the leads you pursue and then blew, end up in that moment because the seller panics and tries to convince instead of recognizing it as an invitation to listen. If you stop doing that one thing, a free activity, you can increase the number of closed deals in your pipeline by 31%. Costs you nothing. It is zero risk, apart from you have to change your behavior, which is instead of trying to convince, you actually listen. Not the weaponized listening, the active listening that you've been taught and matching and mirroring to make people like you. You can't make someone like you. You can deceive them, but as soon as they recognize the deception, then they will distrust you. So, 2 tips. First thing, stop prospecting for short term. Do not prospect for anyone who's likely to buy in the next 0 to 6 months. Prospect for people who will start actively looking in 6 to 36 months and cultivate those relationships where there is no competition, because all your competition is swimming around in the bloody Red Sea with all the other sharks. And they're not focusing any attention on being timely, relevant, and valuable, understanding the moving parts, customer intimacy, understanding what they want to achieve and what's possible, what's not, and empowering them to get there. So when they move into active looking, everyone else is selling against the customer's voice, the customer's vision, and the customer's fingerprints all over whatever the RFP is or the intended outcome. And if you ally yourself with the buyer, you start with the right intent. When you are prospecting, you start by looking for a customer for life, not for a transaction or to book a meeting. Now, when you prospect for customer for life, you project a very different intent, which the buyer's brain picks up on, and resistance is lowered and intimacy is possible. So trust is possible quicker, but not through manipulation or coercion, through service.
I think what you just said, with not like prospecting, looking for people that are going to buy right now or 3 months or whatever the case may be. You know how we always talk about, detach yourself from the outcome. This is a rather deliberate way of helping the salesperson do that, along with kind of detaching from all these other metrics, these crazy metrics that we have in place. I saw someone post, oh, my salesperson, my SDR, I only gave him a week of onboarding. Okay, which is already insane to me. He's already on the phone. He made 1,000 dials and booked 3 meetings.
Yeah, really? Oh my word! I've got a visual in front of me because whenever I feel depressed, I look at this to make me more depressed. And it's a tweet, and it says, "Are you savages hitting the phone? I'm at work right now. This is straight from my call report. Last 30 days, selling sales enablement software. Total calls 1464. Average calls per day 66.51. Voicemails 1054. Calls connected 116. Positive calls out of 1,464, 37. Demos booked 9. So not even revenue, but wait for it. Then we did the tech stack that goes with this. So Apollo, $2,500, $200 a month. Sales Loft Cadences, $900. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, 1,020. Email, 72. LinkedIn Premium Business, 780. Zoom Info, $10,000. Total low-end cost, 15,172 for running an SDR, just equipping them with the stuff that they need. High-end, Apollo, 500 a month, $6,000. 900 for Sales Loft, LinkedIn Navigator, email, Microsoft goes up to 60 quid, $60. Then LinkedIn Premium, 840. Zoom Info, 20,000. Now you're talking $29,880 just to have someone sit at a desk and speak to another human being for 3 minutes a day and book 9 demos in a month.
I mean, when you break down the numbers like that, it sounds kind of insane. It is actually insane.
Well, it is, but again, leadership is culpable because they're driving it. So I have a thesis that if we measure the value contributed per seller hour instead of all the other drivel that we do, we will get a much better outcome. So I've shamelessly stolen the model from Tim Urban's very good book, What's Our Problem? And he talks about the difference between a golem and a genie. The golem is this creature of death magic that saps the joy out of life and just slows everything down. The genie grants you 3 wishes and makes things happen. Well, if you look at your target, if you've got a quota of 1.2 million, that's 4 grand a day, basically. That means 500 an hour. If you're doing stuff that contributes $10 an hour or sucks out 1,000 an hour, that's a really bad use of your time. And the CFO should probably be a little bit edgy, because I believe that everybody in the business is responsible for the financial health of the business. When we see stupid things happening, we should be standing up and saying, well, hang on a second, this seems to be eating away at our profit. This is jobs, this is dividends, but people don't. So what are the metrics that we should stop measuring?
What should we? I think we should stop immediately these dumb cold call metrics.
Yep.
Like, stop.
Yep.
Like, in what universe is your SDR? First of all, let's start with what we're doing internally and how we're treating our employees internally
Amen.
first, before we can fix what our interactions and what we're doing to our buyers, right? Let's fix the internal processes and how we see our employees. Like, our employees are not machines, they're not robots. Why don't we start taking care of them and give them proper onboarding to begin with? Please, I beg of you. Let's.
Right. Okay. So on onboarding, a new employee is putting the company, the job, the boss, their peers, the customers, the decision that they've made on probation for 120 days, typically the first 4 months.
Mhm.
Now, which again, most recruiters only give a 3-month guarantee. I think this is a broken system as well. No one wants to make a hire. They want to hire someone who succeeds. They want someone who
Yes.
fits in culturally, who
Yes.
contributes, who gets better over time and stays, and then they grow other people to succeed them as they progress. That's what people really want when they hire. But instead, what they get is a warm body on a seat who's been matched to a word search. That's not getting the job done. We're just about to launch a recruitment proposition where we work with the candidate for as long as they're employed. Whether it's 1 year or 10 years, we still carry on supporting and coaching them through that process, because managers don't coach.
You telling me that?
Yeah. How
Yeah.
much coaching did you actually receive when you were a salesperson throughout your entire career, apart from the stuff you went out and sold?
The last time, I'm not lying to you about this, the last time I was actually coached on a deal, how to, do business or whatever, was literally 10 years ago.
Okay. Because there's no room for improvement. You're the finished article.
That's it. The onboarding is terrible, for number one.
Yeah.
We're looking for the wrong things, I think,
I
when
agree.
we're hiring people, and the manager's job is to coach. Like, that's their job. We're hiring someone, we're saying, okay, you had success in the past, which who knows what that's based on. We're giving you this onboarding shoddy 3-week at best onboarding, where we're teaching you to talk about the product, we're teaching you to talk about yourself. We're teaching you about the ICP, like the bare bones of it, and nothing more than that. And then we say, okay, your 3-week onboarding is done. Great, go sell $1.2 million worth of our stuff. And then there's no coaching, there's no real deal coaching, which a lot of organizations don't understand what real deal coaching looks like. They don't understand what a real pipeline meeting supposed to look like. So you're not really learning as a sales rep. And I speak from experience when I say these things, because I've been through it, or lack thereof, right?
Absolutely. Well, again, why are sales meetings a death march instead of a learning experience that people actually look forward to?
Yeah.
Come out of it energized, and then because they attended, they improve. If you are not running sales meetings with that impact, you have to look in the mirror, because what you're doing is you're wasting however many full-time employee minutes every time they have to listen to someone live from their forecast, that work of fiction. Why not spend that time more productively? Why not ask one question at each of these sales meetings, which is the hardest problem that you guys are trying to address? What's the biggest obstacle? What are the kind of questions that we're going to have to face in front of customers over the next 3 months? How are we going to respond to them? That's a more productive use. The manager should spend 3 minutes a day talking to their people about pipeline so they know exactly where it is, and then they can make an accurate forecast. The CRM has maybe 20% reasonable data in the sales data. The good data is in the customer success information. No one ever looks in there. It's insane. Customers are talking to customer success people 6 to 8 hours a day. They speak to a salesperson for about 3 minutes a day to try and get them off the phone. And you're using that data from sales to determine your investments, who you're going to hire, when you're going to make investments, when you're going to hire. That's crazy. Okay, so let's get into the hiring. What are the qualities that make a really good, ethical seller who is successful and is able to give voice to their values within an organization? What are the qualities that make them stand out and be different?
Yeah, I think for me, if I were recruiting, I would look for what I call the outliers. I'm not necessarily looking for someone that has walked in lockstep with their organization the entire time, because that person likely is using some of their intuition to guide some of their interactions with their clients, with their buyers. When recruiters are asking questions, they're kind of asking landmine questions, if you will. So they're asking questions to disqualify people instead of asking a question that will qualify someone for the job.
It's even worse than that, though, Leah, because what they've typically done is they've cut and pasted the job description of the person who just left for non-performance.
Mhm.
And then they go out and word search for that instead of looking for the predictors of success. Things like habits,
Yeah.
values, beliefs, cognitive abilities, the questions that they will have faced in the past. The
Mhm.
experience, the data on this is really clear. It says that prior experience in a sales role adds only one thing, which is a slightly faster ramp up. It
Mhm.
does not make any difference at all to performance.
I agree with
It
that.
opens up a much wider market because you can, if you're not looking for people with banking experience or software experience, but people with good human skills,
Yeah.
organization, the ability to genuinely empathize, really good listening, fantastic questioning, the ability to coordinate and get draw people together around a common purpose and unify.
Mhm.
Those are the skills that I want from my people. What I don't want is someone who can hammer the phone or knock out spears and bump emails in order to irritate a lot of people at scale.
Mhm.
I'd much rather that someone was working on maybe 20 accounts and they work that medium term. And the objective is over the next 6 to 36 months to bring in two of them a quarter and then
Mhm.
expand. Well, if they're an ideal customer, in my world, my ideal is somewhere between 10 and 50 million ARR. They've probably got funding and they took funding when money was free. And now they're
Mhm.
paying interest on 100 million, something like that. And they're fast running out of money. And that interest is coming out of their bottom line. So they've still got a target to hit. If they don't, there are consequences. There's probably a loan note, or it triggers some dilution, or they'll put someone else on the board and they'll lose more control. The reality is that there's so much business in the hot market. You never need to go cold. You can redeploy all of those resources, that time, that money, that effort on high value activity. And if you're only working with 20 accounts, and you're not looking to close them, you're always looking to be timely, relevant,
Mhm.
to ensure that you're helping them get clarity on what's real, what's not, what's possible, what's not,
Mhm.
empowering them to move slightly closer to the decision that's the right decision for them. When
Mhm.
into active looking, you're really the only show in town. And you know all the different moving parts. Their voice, their fingerprints, their vision is all over it, and everybody's needs are catered for. Then everyone else is selling against that, doing feature function pitches. I know who I would rather be, because if I get one of those ideal customers, not only will I get that initial deal, but they will stay my customer for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years if you're in your 20s.
What you're describing is actually the opposite of what's happening. They're recruiting now based on the salesperson's ability to do cold outreach. Like 80% of the job descriptions are that.
Mhm.
I was talking to a sales lead, a couple sales leaders about a role in their organization. And like when I'm talking to a recruiter or a sales leader or hiring manager, whatever, I want to talk about like their metrics and like the business numbers and see if they make sense to me. You know, I was doing just that bit of digging, and a lot of their metrics made no sense. I'm just like, you were at 5 million ARR last year. You want to get to 10 million this year, but you want to do it. How are you? You know, they just had no plan. It just didn't make sense. And then
But the plan is a spreadsheet.
the, it didn't make any sense. So I talked to a friend that knew of the organization, and they were like, oh, really? Well, they told me that they're now going to require every AE to do 75 outbound calls a day. And I was like, oh, that's the plan, which still makes no sense. This is what's happening out there.
I think we need to start thinking critically and consequentially and really focus on what matters and let go of what doesn't. When I'm prospecting for a customer for life, i.e., someone who pays money and pays money over and over and over again because I do
Mhm.
a job of providing them with a service that they would hate to do without.
But that is not the mindset, Marcus, right now.
I understand. What that means is I have to do no cold calling, zero. The top of my funnel only has motivated buyers who are either going to buy now or they are going to buy later.
Mhm.
And I never quibble over price,
Mhm.
which means that also every time I discount, it means it adds a tariff to my prospecting requirement if I go cold. But if I sell hot, so who's the person that you trust most on the planet in business?
Who's the person that I trust most? Oh, wow. That's a really good question.
First name only,
Her name is Rachel.
Rachel. So if Rachel said you really need to have this chat with Marcus, what's the probability you take the call?
Probably 100%.
And if Marcus brought you something that was timely, was relevant, was valuable, was affordable, and it was on point with your plan, what's the probability you would buy from Marcus?
Probably 100%.
And what's the probability you wouldn't go out to market to get comparisons and you probably wouldn't quibble over price? If it was affordable, it was on point.
Probably 100%.
So if you have that kind of conversion rate, the most obvious question is, how do I get referred hot? All prospecting activities should be working out who already is trusted by your customers.
Mhm.
Engage with those people so that they say, you know, Leah, you need to talk to Marcus. And they make the introduction. That already saves about a third of the sales cycle
Right.
and none of the upfront work. Now, I'm intelligently lazy. I think you should do the minimum amount of work for the maximum return. And the company motto is double the money for half the work with no loss in quality. In fact, ideally, now I've got more time to focus on high value activity. I can spend time on Genie instead of Gollum. Yeah. And typically when I do that, I 10x my contribution. That's way more interesting than trying to squeeze people into bad metrics because
Yeah.
it makes for a terrible experience being a seller. I mean,
Yeah.
trying to,
Horrible. You know, my last role that I had, which I was laid off from for different reasons because I refused to do some of the stuff they were asking me to do, which were like throwing stuff at the wall, hoping to stick some of the stuff that we're talking about. They had this mindset, you know, sell the demo, make how X amount of dials, do 20 demos a month, all these crazy metrics. I'm just like, how are you seeing return from this? This is bad all the way around. I didn't realize how bad it was before I got into that role. I didn't. In fact, I venture to say that before I started in tech sales, I had another view of how sales is and how it should be run, and then I was quickly proven wrong.
the idiocy is endemic. I've had several clients be put on PIPs because they don't make enough dials, but they're on
Yeah.
200% of quota. Had another one who's on 200% made redundant because he's not really a medic sort of person. Now, he's a lovely guy. The clients love him. He's been with the company for 8 years and they make him redundant. Just bring in someone from outside because he doesn't fit the mold. I get that. There's got to be a cultural fit, but
Mhm.
he's seeding and customers love working with him and his people love working with him. That to me seems short-sighted. I had another one who got put on a PIP for not making enough dials. Now, bear in mind, he's currently tracking at 200% of quota. And since the PIP, he's closed $500,000. And bear in mind, his annual quota is $600,000.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah. But he did a deal that he started the day after they lost the last one. And it was 30 units at 6,500 at zero discount. Took his time, patient, not attached to the outcome. And I think that's what we need to start looking for. We need people who have a high tolerance for boredom. I think they need to be planners and they need to be thinkers. I think the day of the grind, it never really had its day. The only reason it worked for anybody was because money was free and you could throw warm bodies at it.
Mm-hmm. Like to your point, the things that we're seeing like is really nonsensical. You meet your quota or you're pretty close to your quota, but because you didn't meet some stupid KPI metric of dials or whatever, you're now deemed a risk. You're put on a pit. It defies logic. It doesn't make any sense.
I see this mirrored in so many other parts of business. There's a fabulous film out, again, it's called Show Her the Money. And it's all about the underfunding of female founders.
Oh, I saw you talk about that on LinkedIn once.
It's fascinating. There's a VC called Pocket Lee. She's a Chinese original, or she is Chinese. She studied in SoCal and at 24 set up a VC fund. Over the last few years, she's now had 5 unicorns. Okay, so 5 companies valued at $1 billion with over 250 million turnover. How much do you think she managed to raise in the second fund?
Oh, I guess it should have been quite a lot.
60 million.
60?
60.
Mm.
Wait for this one, and this will strike close to home. Up until 2021, only 13 Black women founders had raised $1 million or more.
That's pretty enraging, but it doesn't surprise me.
What an untapped market with all of that untapped demand. I mean, how many Black entrepreneurs are there in the United States? Black men get 1%. Women get 2.6% across the board. Asians get 3 or 4%. Hispanics, 3%. These are largely hardworking, either immigrant communities or communities where the women in particular are often in a position where they have to be a breadwinner. They've got motivation. Why are we not tapping into this? And what's really interesting, and it's the same thing in interviews, because you see this where people say that we're going to be diverse and they hire for difference and fire for not fitting in. Okay. Women get and minorities get asked risk-based questions, and white male founders tend to get asked about the opportunity and the potential. That represents a really fascinating opportunity. If we can engage with them to handle that moment better, that opens up the door. I think that represents a great opportunity for people like us to play in that space and really have a fantastic difference to make.
That makes complete sense. One of the roles that I had, we were actually selling to VCs, we were selling to fund managers, financial professionals, and so forth. And like I always knew that realm, that arena was a little like exclusive. Like I always knew that in my mind, but before I actually took this role, I really had no idea about it firsthand until I entered that arena, and we did a trip where we were in New York and we were like, visiting potential customers and pitching and so forth. Like no one that we saw or talked to. I was the only Black woman in sight, only Black
Were you the
person.
only woman? Were you the only woman as well?
Yes, it was shocking to me. I was just like, wow, we've visited how many clients now, and I have not seen a female or let alone a Black person, let alone a Black woman. And it was very eye-opening to see that. But that, it was very eye-opening to see that, but that is where the money is. It was kind of weird to see that. It's like you hear about it, but until you experience it firsthand, it doesn't seem real.
Well,
But that was a weird experience.
and again, the fact that it's 2024 and we're still having this conversation is slightly disturbing. However,
Yeah.
it also opens up a really interesting question. Where else are we seeing bias get in the way? We see it in management, we see it in recruitment, we see it in leadership, we see it in the metrics, because people are not thinking critically. They simply take what is and they don't rock the boat, or they don't want to be noticed. So tall poppy syndrome, if they've got a persecuting boss, they don't want to be seen to stand out because that creates problems.
Yeah.
And so we don't stand up and say, this is wrong. And I
Yeah.
think the starting point, I think, has to be middle management and recruitment.
Yeah.
Got to stop
Absolutely.
over promoting jumped up SDRs into positions of chief revenue officer. We've got to stop promoting individual contributors who, by their very nature, are selfish, and look for the qualities that make a good manager. A good manager is a grower and developer of people, and they understand that their job is to get the team over the line, not to get the number so that they look good and to hell with everyone else. And speaks to where we need to create adult to adult agreements instead of these surrogate parent child. Boss, I want you to hire me, pay me, pick me up when I'm down, pat me on the back when I'm up, pay me even more, develop me, grow me, promote me, make all the decisions. So when they're wrong, it's your fault. And by the time I'm ready, we both know that I have more talent in my little finger than you do in your entire body. So step aside. And then the parent scripting from the boss is, you're mine, I own you. You exist for no other reason to make me look good, to make me successful. My faults and failings are lovable quirks. When you talk about me behind my back to other people, I'm the best boss you've ever had, the best boss in this company, bar none, and possibly the best boss to ever walk the face of the planet. That doesn't work. Never has, never will. You need to enlist people as adults. And I think that's where we've gone horribly wrong, because we've tried to turn sales into this factory. We've tried to remove the human element to try and control things. That's not how relationships work. You don't control relationships unless you're coercive.
We've created the situation where I like to say, like, all the sales teams, all the sales orgs pretty much look alike, not just from a physical standpoint, but everybody has the same thoughts about topics, about things, about the way they should be done. And we're looking for perfect people within that framework, and when the recruiters are screening and they're talking to people, they're actually looking to screen people out. So here's a really great example, like a personal example of mine. One of my roles I wanted to do was in the best interest of the customer, of the buyer. And it was not to push them into a deal sooner than they were ready. And they were just not ready. It was not the right time. I knew it was not the right time. And I'm like, okay, it's not the right time for this. Let's stay in touch, and I'll provide you value. I'll provide you some information that you asked for, and so forth and so on. So we had already built that relationship up, but I was not going to jeopardize that relationship by trying to ram some deal through. It made no sense.
It's not, anyone who would ask you to is asking you to trade trust and your reputation. How dare they?
I would never do that. I like to say that's part of my downfall a lot of times, because I refuse to compromise my integrity in terms of when I'm doing business or when I'm talking to someone. I'm going to do the right thing by the person. Do you know what I mean? And
there is
a lot of
but you've made the point. You cannot compromise your integrity, or it is not integrity. Your values are not negotiable. The moment you compromise your integrity, There goes trust. And you've made a hypocrite of yourself. In trust in a tough environment is your differentiator. If you
Hmm.
want to differentiate in this market, be a decent human being, be trustworthy. None of this technique. No, the technique is utterly irrelevant. In fact, the moment you start trying to use technique to convince, to control, to manage somebody to do something that you want them to do, which is not in their best interest at this
Yeah.
moment, you have just triggered their brain to see you as a threat. And you will have probably caused them the next time to avoid your call. And you deserve it.
A lot of that pressure from the individual contributors is definitely coming from the leadership. Oh, this deal is taking too long. When are they going to close? And blah blah blah. But you cannot ask, in my view, you cannot ask a salesperson to push a deal through, or you shouldn't, if the buyer's not ready, if the timing isn't right, if you're not going to be, like you said, if you're not going to be relevant,
That's
timely,
misselling.
etc.
That's mis-selling. That's
Yeah.
immoral. And frankly, if it goes wrong, they should sue you for every penny you got. How dare you sell something to someone where that's not right for them? The whole purpose of coming to a salesperson is to make the right decision. That's our job. We have no other job than empower them to make the right decision for themselves at the right time. And anything that deviates from that is self-serving, and it's not in the buyer's best interest. It's anything but buyer-centric. And this is when
Mhm.
people claim, I have an I win, you win mentality. I win, you win is great until the end of a tricky quarter or when a valuation.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah, we're coming to the back end of the call. This has been really wonderful. Definitely have you back. Tell me this. You've got a golden ticket and you can go back and whisper in the ear of the idiot Leah, age 23, who probably thought that she was immortal, knew everything. And what would you say to her that she'd have ignored but would have benefited from?
I would say don't let anyone pressure you into doing something that you know is not the right thing in
Uh,
any circumstance.
Absolutely. Read a book called Giving Voice to Values by Mary Gentile. You can look at earlier episodes because it's at the editors now. So it'll be out a couple of weeks before this one. And what's really interesting, Mary interviewed 1,000 MBA students coming into the Princeton MBA. And she asked them, have you ever been asked to do something that didn't sit well with you? It was a question along those lines. Out of over 1,000, how many do you think said no?
Have you ever, what was the question again? Repeat.
Have you ever been asked to do something that jarred with your values?
Oh, I would say probably 90%.
Zero didn't have an experience where they'd been asked to do it. So
Hmm.
popping up 100 grand or something to turn up onto this MBA, every one of them had faced this experience.
Yeah.
The research went a little bit deeper, and what she found was 25% of them were able to give voice to their values, stand up for what they believed, and no negative repercussions. And in fact, in many cases, they're able to change the other person's objective and
Hmm.
do the right thing. But at worst, no negative repercussions. And in that 25%, the one common denominator was this: someone senior to them earlier in their career had taken them to a moment and asked them to face that question. The manager's job is to prepare you for the questions that you're going to face in the field. What are the questions that your customers are asking? What are the questions that they're going to ask you? How are you going to respond to those questions? How are
Hmm.
you going to ensure that that empowers the other person to make the right decision, whether they buy from you or not? And when we start doing this, it's really interesting. Again, I'm not saying it to brag, I'm saying it because I'm really quite surprised. But so far, 16 out of 17 people that I have employed this approach on have bought willingly without ever being asked to buy, without ever being sold anything. They volunteered and they did so willingly. And the 17th is a clear future next step. The timing is right. The top of the funnel is absolutely pristine because I have a very gentle 3 or 4 steps that get to the point where the other person volunteers and puts themselves forward because they see that there is a natural fit in terms of our values. So I only ever talk to people who are already bought into what I do, and then I don't have to prospect. So when people say this is a pipe dream or it's wishful thinking, not only is it not, but I have dozens of clients who are 150, 200% of quota selling commodities in a crowded market where they haven't had new products for years. You differentiate in how you sell. You differentiate in your intent.
Absolutely. Buyers pick up on that, right? Buyers can smell BS too,
When you project out that you're lying, I did a course with the Emotional Intelligence Academy, I think it was, and they look at forensic interviewing. So using the work of Paul Ekman on microexpressions. What's really interesting about their study is that people don't leak the lie, they leak the truth. In the UK, there was a terrible murder of two young girls called the Soham murderers. And a caretaker at the school was interviewed. And he was interviewed on TV. And if you slow it down, you can see him gleefully smiling for about a 30th of a second. Thought he got away with it. And then the police interviews as well. What's interesting is people will exude the truth. They don't exude a lie. In the interview process, we can find out so much by asking really simple, instructive questions and having a structure to see whether someone comes with the qualities we cannot hire for, like honesty, keeping their word, thinking creatively around a problem that's nigh on impossible, but still coming up with good logic. These are the qualities I really want. What I don't want is someone who's just a phone monkey, is hammering the phone, beating through data, and then pissing a lot of people off, because that's just interrupting. That's like being a burglar.
It is. And it's just like when you hear about, this whole thing about calling the cell phone. This has become a big issue now. I would never presume to call someone's cell phone that doesn't know me in an attempt to sell something. It just feels, to me, it feels very, very intrusive to be calling the cell phone of a CEO or whoever it is, right?
I think the most obvious question is to all of you who are founders, CEOs, CROs, when was the last time you actually bought off a cold call? Because out of all the cold calls that people have attempted to get through to you, if you have bought anything, it will be very rare. When you receive the call, in all probability, you are thinking, how do I get this idiot off the phone? And you probably made the sale quite difficult because you felt it was a risk. People filter for risk first when they're buying. They then filter for opportunity cost. They then, very low down the chain of command, filter for value, ROI, all features, functions, and that rubbish. But they're filtering for risk. Give the buyer's brain no reason to perceive you as a risk.
As a risk, yeah.
In TA, they talk about having your parent, adult, child, ego state, and on your shoulders are your parents and your grandparents. Well, if you take yourself out of the equation, you just halve the level of complexity in a relationship. This is about not being attached. But if your attachment is to make quota in terms of your dials, meeting quota, there's no way you can behave in the way that you need to, so their brain doesn't feel triggered.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're talking to our buyers and we're in discovery with our buyers, so many things running through the mind. It's like, if I don't close this deal, if this deal is in the pipeline, what's going to happen? What's my sales manager going to think? What's going to happen with my quota? All these competing interests that are in the back of your mind. You can't possibly detach from the outcome or work in the buyer's best interest when you're in that type of mindset.
Which is why you have to start with self-awareness and self. If you are not clear about who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, where your boundaries are, your identity, your self-concept, then you're really going to struggle in life, let alone in sales or management. And it's not about the technique. If there's any advice that I could give, it would be focus on self-awareness, focus on listening, Focus on really powerful questions that empower, that challenge, that provoke, and create tension. Focus on intimacy above all else, market, customer, and buyer intimacy, because those are the evergreen building blocks of a career in whatever walk of life. If you choose to change career, those are evergreen skills because human beings are social primates.
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Leah, how can people get hold of you?
Obviously, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Leah Borges, LeahBorges. They can email me. I'm at leahborges.net, first name. Those are the primary ways people can reach me.
Excellent. So, Leah Borges from Sales Done Right, thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. It's been a pleasure.
So, this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If this has provoked some thinking in you, you'll find a couple of links underneath the blurb. One is a link to my selling aptitude test. Everyone scores badly. You're being rated against the top 4% performers on the planet. Unless you're one of the top 4%, you will come up looking ugly. That's the intention. The second is Unlock Hot Revenue Audit. It's a quick questionnaire to help you identify 15 ways that you can sell hot, not cold, and you don't even need to talk to me. If you'd like to get more engaged, if this goes out in time, there'll be a series of 3 webinars. The first one is on win-back. The second is on the ally method, so how to create an alliance between your brain and your buyer's brain. And the third one is on creating pipeline certainty. So if if it's already gone out, they will be recorded, and I would go and have a look at those, because if you're selling cold in this market, you are insane. It's massively ineffective, and your time would be better spent almost anywhere else playing the lottery. So in the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.